Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The Caribbean sun beat mercilessly against the weathered shutters of Duval Manor as Isabella pressed her palm against the cool stone wall, listening to the angry voices rising from the sugar fields below. 3 months had passed since the workers had begun their quiet rebellion, their productivity dwindling like sand through her fingers. The overseer she'd hired from Kingston had fled in the night, taking half her remaining silver with him. "Mistress Isabella," came the trembling voice of her house servant Marie. "They're refusing to work the north field again. Say the soil's cursed since Master Henri passed." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her 28 years pressing down like the humid air that clung to everything on this godforsaken island. Henri had been dead for 2 years now, claimed by yellow fever, leaving her with debts that multiplied like the tropical storms that battered their shores each season. The other plantation owners whispered behind their fans at Sunday service, waiting for her inevitable failure, ready to divide her lands among themselves like vultures picking clean bones. The sound of hoofbeats on the coral stone drive made her straighten her shoulders. Through the window, she watched Dr. Pemberton's carriage approach, dust devils dancing in its wake. Behind him rode 2 of the island's most prominent planters, their faces grim beneath their wide-brimmed hats. Isabella knew this visit would bring no comfort. She met them in the drawing room, her black mourning dress a stark contrast to the sun-bleached furniture that had once been her pride. Dr. Pemberton, a thin man whose kindness had sustained her through Henri's final days, looked uncomfortable as he settled into the wicker chair. "Isabella, my dear," he began, his British accent crisp despite years in the tropics. "We've come with a proposition that might help resolve your difficulties." Thomas Hartwell, whose neighboring plantation had prospered while hers crumbled, leaned forward with predatory interest. "The workers respect strength, Mrs. Duval. They sense weakness like sharks smell blood. You need a firm hand." "I've tried hiring overseers," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "They either flee or steal from me." "Which is why," interrupted the third man, Captain Morrison, whose shipping interests connected him to every port from Jamaica to Trinidad, "we've brought you an unconventional solution." Dr. Pemberton cleared his throat nervously. "There's a man washed ashore 3 days ago after his ship foundered on Devil's Reef. The authorities were prepared to hang him, but his reputation precedes him. Ronan Hale was known throughout these waters as a man who could command absolute loyalty from the roughest crews." "A pirate," Isabella said flatly. "You're suggesting I hire a pirate?" Hartwell's smile was cold. "A desperate situation calls for desperate measures. He's in the Fort Charles jail, awaiting the gallows. But if someone of standing were to offer him employment, claim him as bonded labor, the governor might be persuaded to commute his sentence." Isabella walked to the window, watching her workers moving listlessly through the cane fields. The plants that should have stood tall and green were yellowing at the edges, and she could see gaps where entire sections had been left unharvested. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening. "What makes you think this man would serve me faithfully when he's made his living stealing from people like us?" Morrison chuckled. "Because the alternative is a rope around his neck, and because, despite his reputation, Hale was known for keeping his word once given. Pirates may be thieves and murderers, but they understand honor in their own twisted way." That evening, after her visitors had departed, Isabella sat alone on her veranda, listening to the distant sound of drums from the worker quarters. The rhythm spoke of unrest, of plans being made in the darkness beyond her reach. Marie had served her dinner in silence, her usual chatter replaced by worried glances toward the fields. As if summoned by her thoughts, a figure emerged from the shadows of the royal palm trees that lined her drive. Old Samuel, her most trusted field hand, approached with the slow gait of a man who'd seen too many seasons come and go. His weathered face held the wisdom of someone who'd survived both slavery and freedom, who'd watched her grow from a child playing in these same gardens to the desperate woman she'd become. "Mistress," he said quietly, removing his hat. "The workers, they're planning to leave come morning, going to seek work on the Morrison plantation, where the pay comes regular and the overseer don't raise his hand to them." Isabella felt her heart sink. Without workers, the plantation would be worthless within a month. And you, Samuel? Will you go with them? The old man's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with intelligence, studied her face. Master Henri, he treated us fair, but these young ones, they don't remember the old ways. They only see a woman alone, trying to hold together something that's falling apart like a house in a hurricane. What would you do if you were me? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the storm clouds that now covered half the sky. Sometimes, mistress, when the old ways ain't working, you gotta try something new, even if it scares you, even if it goes against everything you've been taught about what's proper and what ain't. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Isabella made her decision. Tomorrow she would visit Fort Charles and meet this Ronan Hale. She would look into the eyes of a man who'd lived outside the law and decide if desperation had finally driven her mad, or if perhaps salvation sometimes came wearing the most unlikely face. The first drops of rain began to fall as she rose from her chair, each droplet warm against her skin like tears she refused to shed. In 12 hours her life would change forever, though she couldn't yet imagine how completely the storm that was approaching would reshape everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, and about the thin line between civilization and chaos. The iron gates of Fort Charles creaked open like the jaws of some ancient beast as Isabella's carriage rolled through the courtyard. The fortress, built to protect Bridgetown's harbor from Spanish raiders, now served as the island's prison, its coral stone walls stained dark with decades of Caribbean storms. The morning sun cast harsh shadows between the buildings, and the air hung thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and something else, something that spoke of desperation and broken dreams. Captain Reeves, the fort's commandant, greeted her with obvious surprise. His red coat was immaculate despite the heat, but his face showed the weariness of a man who'd spent too many years dealing with the dregs of humanity that washed up on their shores. Mrs. Duval, I must say this is highly irregular. The man you wish to see is scheduled to hang tomorrow at dawn. He's shown no remorse for his crimes, and I fear he may attempt some form of violence even in chains. Isabella lifted her chin, drawing upon the aristocratic bearing her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Captain, I've brought the proper documentation from Governor Thornfield. As a plantation owner in good standing, I have the right to claim bonded labor for my estate. Reeves examined the papers with obvious reluctance. 7 years of service, should he accept. But Mrs. Duval, this man isn't some petty thief or debtor. Ronan Hale captained the vessel Serpent's Kiss for nearly a decade. His crew raided shipping lanes from here to the Carolinas. The man is dangerous. More dangerous than losing my entire estate to bankruptcy? Isabella asked quietly. Captain, I'm not here out of charity or foolishness. I need someone who can command respect from workers who've lost faith in authority. Sometimes desperate times require desperate measures. The captain's weathered face softened slightly. He'd known her since she was a child, had attended her wedding to Henri and her husband's funeral. Very well, but I'll have armed guards present, and at the first sign of trouble, this arrangement ends. The dungeons beneath the fort were a maze of narrow corridors carved directly into the coral rock. The air grew cooler as they descended, but also thicker, laden with the accumulated misery of countless prisoners who'd waited here for judgment. Oil lamps flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. They stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Through the small barred window, Isabella could see only darkness. The guard inserted a massive key and turned it with a grinding screech that echoed through the stone passages. Stand back from the door, Hale, Captain Reeves called out. You have a visitor. The figure that emerged from the shadows was nothing like what Isabella had expected. She'd imagined a brute, scarred and crude, perhaps missing limbs or eyes from his violent trade. Instead, she found herself looking at a man who moved with the fluid grace of a predator, despite the heavy shackles around his wrists and ankles. Ronan Hale stood perhaps 6 feet tall, his dark hair hanging loose around shoulders that spoke of years hauling rigging and wielding cutlass. His skin was bronzed by sun and salt, marked with the inevitable scars of his profession, but his green eyes held an intelligence that was both unexpected and unsettling. He wore the simple clothes of a prisoner, rough cotton shirt and canvas breeches, but somehow managed to carry himself with a dignity that the circumstances couldn't diminish. So, he said, his voice carrying the lilting accent of Ireland mixed with something harder forged by years at sea, the lady comes to look at the condemned man. Tell me, are you here for entertainment, Or do you have business with someone bound for the gallows? Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to meet his gaze directly. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Hale. One that might save your life. His laugh was low and dangerous. Ah, salvation. And what would a fine lady like yourself want with a man like me? Surely not my charming personality or my skill at parlor conversation. Captain Reeves stepped forward, hand on his sword hilt. Show respect to Mrs. Duval, or this interview ends now. Ronan's eyes never left Isabella's face. Mrs. Duval, is it? Widow's weeds in this heat. You must be recently bereaved, and desperate to come calling on pirates in a dungeon. What is it you're after, lady? I own a sugar plantation 20 miles from here, Isabella said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. My workers are in rebellion, my overseers have fled, and my estate is failing. I need someone who can restore order and discipline. In exchange, I can offer you 7 years of bonded service instead of a rope. For the first time, genuine interest flickered in those green eyes. Bonded service. Slavery, in other words, but with prettier language. Employment with restrictions on your movement, Isabella corrected. Room, board, and the chance to live. At the end of 7 years, your freedom and a stake to start fresh elsewhere. Ronan moved closer, his chains clanking against the stone floor. Even shackled, he seemed to fill the small space with a presence that was both magnetic and threatening. And what makes you think I won't cut your throat the moment I'm free of these chains and disappear into the jungle? The question hung in the humid air like a challenge. Isabella could feel Captain Reeves tensing beside her, ready to end this negotiation at the first wrong word. But something in Ronan's eyes, perhaps the faintest glimmer of curiosity, or maybe just the recognition of one desperate soul calling to another, made her step forward instead of back. Because, she said quietly, you're tired of running. Because even pirates get old, and the sea that once called to you now feels like a prison. Because somewhere under all that defiance and anger, you're looking for something more than just survival. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of waves against the fortress walls. Ronan studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through all her careful composure to the frightened woman beneath. Finally, he smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. 7 years, you say? And what guarantee do I have that you won't work me to death in your cane fields or sell me to some other master when the mood strikes you? You have my word, Isabella replied, which I suspect means more to you than any legal document. Aye, he said softly. It does. Very well, Mrs. Duval. I accept your devil's bargain, but know this. I may be your bonded man, but I'll be no one's slave. I'll work for you, fight for you if necessary, but I'll not bow and scrape and pretend to be something I'm not. Captain Reeves cleared his throat nervously. If this arrangement is to proceed, there are papers to be signed, bonds to be posted. The governor will need to approve the commutation personally. Isabella nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Ronan's face. It will take 2 days to complete the arrangements. Can you wait that long for your freedom? Lady, Ronan said, with another of those dangerous smiles. I've been waiting my whole life for something worth the risk. 2 more days won't kill me, though I make no promises about what happens after that. The morning Ronan Hale arrived at Duval Manor, the very air seemed to change. Isabella watched from her study window as the prison wagon rolled up the Coralstone Drive, flanked by 2 mounted guards who looked as uncomfortable as men escorting a caged tiger. The workers in the nearby fields had stopped their labor entirely, forming small clusters as they whispered and pointed toward the approaching vehicle. When the wagon stopped, Ronan emerged with fluid grace despite the ankle shackles that would remain until sunset, Captain Reeves's final precaution. He stood in the blazing Caribbean sun, his green eyes surveying the estate with the calculating gaze of a man who'd learned to assess every situation for threats and opportunities. The guards unlocked his wrist irons but kept their hands on their pistols as they departed, leaving Isabella alone with her dangerous gamble. So this is where the lady lives, Ronan said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Impressive, though I'd wager it looked better before the troubles started. He wasn't wrong. The manor house, built in the grand plantation style with wide verandas and towering columns, showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the shutters, and several of the ornate iron railings had begun to rust in the salt air. The gardens that had once been Isabella's pride were overgrown, with bougainvillea running wild over carefully planned flower beds. Isabella descended the front steps, acutely aware that every worker on the estate was watching this first encounter. Marie hovered nervously in the doorway, wringing her hands as she observed the man who would now live among them. "Welcome to Duval Manor, Mr. Hale," Isabella said formally. "I trust your accommodations will be adequate." Ronan's laugh was rich and genuine. "After 3 days in that stone box, lady, anything with a roof and no rats will seem like paradise." His expression grew more serious as he studied her face. "But we both know I'm not here for the accommodations. Where do we stand with your rebellious workers?" Before she could answer, old Samuel appeared from the direction of the sugar mill, moving with the measured pace of a man who'd seen every kind of trouble the island could offer. Behind him walked a younger man Isabella didn't recognize, tall, powerfully built, with the ritual scars on his cheeks that marked him as one of the recent arrivals from the Gold Coast. "Mistress," Samuel said, removing his hat, but keeping his eyes fixed on Ronan. "The men want to know who this stranger is, and what authority he has over them." Ronan stepped forward, and Isabella noticed how he moved, balanced on the balls of his feet, ready for violence but not seeking it. "I'm Ronan Hale," he said simply. "Mrs. Duval has hired me to serve as foreman. Any man who wants to work will find me fair. Any man who wants to cause trouble will find me something else entirely." The younger worker, who'd been silent until now, spoke in accented English. "We know who you are, pirate. Your name is spoken in the taverns of Bridgetown. They say you killed a man with your bare hands for touching what was yours. They say many things in taverns," Ronan replied calmly. "Most of them lies told by drunks seeking free drinks, but I'll tell you this truth. I've never harmed a man who didn't deserve it, and I've never broken my word once given." Isabella felt the tension crackling between the men like lightning before a storm. One wrong word, one perceived insult, and blood would flow in her courtyard. But something in Ronan's bearing, confident without being threatening, strong without being brutish, seemed to give the workers pause. Samuel, ever the diplomat, nodded slowly. "A man's past is his own business. It's what he does going forward that matters. But know this, Hale. These workers have families, children. They're not pirates looking for adventure. They need steady work and fair treatment." "Then we understand each other," Ronan said. "I'm not here to play games or settle old scores. I'm here to make this plantation profitable again. That benefits everyone." The crowd began to disperse, workers returning to their tasks with obvious reluctance. But Isabella noticed they moved with more purpose than they had in weeks, as if Ronan's presence had introduced an element of uncertainty that demanded their attention. Over the following days, Isabella watched in amazement as Ronan systematically assessed every aspect of the plantation's operations. He rose before dawn to walk the fields, examining the soil and the condition of the sugarcane. He spent hours at the mill, learning how the machinery worked and identifying problems that previous overseers had ignored. Most surprisingly, he listened to the workers, not just their complaints, but their suggestions for improving efficiency and working conditions. "The North Field isn't cursed," he told Isabella one evening as they reviewed the day's progress on the manor's front veranda. "It's waterlogged. The drainage channels are blocked with debris from last season's hurricane. Clear them out and you'll have the best growing soil on the estate." Isabella poured rum punch from a crystal pitcher, noting how the amber liquid caught the last rays of sunlight. The previous overseer said it would take months to clear those channels properly. "The previous overseer was lazy," Ronan said bluntly, "and probably skimming profit from the construction funds. Give me 2 weeks and a crew of willing workers, and I'll have water flowing where it should." She handed him a glass, their fingers brushing for an instant. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Not fear, as she might have expected when touching a man of violence, but something warmer and more dangerous. "And how do you plan to make them willing?" Ronan's smile was enigmatic. "By treating them like men instead of beasts, by keeping my promises, by showing them that their success and mine are tied together." He sipped the punch and nodded approvingly. "This is good. You make it yourself?" "Marie prepares it, but the recipe was my grandmother's. She came to this island as a young bride and learned to adapt French cooking to Caribbean ingredients." Isabella found herself relaxing despite her better judgment. She used to say that survival in the tropics required equal parts stubbornness and flexibility. A wise woman. "I'm beginning to think that trait runs in your family." The comment hung between them as darkness fell and the sound of drums began to drift from the worker quarters. But tonight, the rhythm seemed different, less urgent, more celebratory. Isabella realized she hadn't heard the angry undercurrent that had characterized their evening gatherings since Henri's death. "They're singing," she said wonderingly. "Aye, work songs from their homeland, mixed with new verses about today's accomplishments. When men feel pride in their labor, they can't help but express it." Isabella studied Ronan's profile in the lamplight, noting the way his harsh features softened when he spoke about the workers. "You care about them. That's not what I expected from a man with your reputation." "My reputation is built on half-truths and tavern stories," Ronan said quietly. "Yes, I've done things I'm not proud of. I've taken ships and cargo, fought men who stood in my way. But I never took a life that wasn't already trying to take mine, and I never harmed those who couldn't defend themselves." He turned to face her fully. "A pirate crew is still a crew, Isabella. Men who trust each other with their lives. Leadership isn't about fear, it's about earning loyalty." The use of her first name sent another shock through her system. No man except Henri had spoken to her so informally in years. She should have corrected him, re-established the proper distance between employer and employee. Instead, she heard herself saying, "And what about women, Ronan? Did you ever harm one of those?" His green eyes darkened. "Never. Not even when, well, there were opportunities in my line of work. A man who would force himself on a woman is no man at all in my book." The sincerity in his voice, combined with the unexpected gentleness she glimpsed beneath his rough exterior, created a dangerous warmth in Isabella's chest. This was not how she had imagined their relationship would develop. She had expected to maintain cold, professional distance, to use his skills while keeping her heart safely guarded behind the walls of propriety and social difference. But as tropical night settled around them and Ronan began telling stories of distant ports and strange customs, Isabella found those walls beginning to crack, and for the first time since Henri's death, she felt truly alive. 6 weeks had passed since Ronan's arrival, and Duval Manor was transforming. The Northfield, freed from its watery curse, now showed the bright green shoots of healthy cane. The workers moved with renewed purpose, their evening songs carrying notes of hope that hadn't been heard since Henri's time. Isabella found herself watching from her windows as Ronan moved among them, his easy authority commanding respect without demanding subservience. But success had drawn unwanted attention. On this sweltering afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon like dark omens, Thomas Hartwell's carriage approached the manor with ominous deliberation. Behind him rode Captain Morrison and 3 other prominent planters, their faces grim beneath their wide-brimmed hats. Isabella met them in the drawing room, her black dress replaced today by a gown of deep blue silk that reminded her of the ocean at dusk. She'd noticed how Ronan's eyes lingered on her when she wore colors other than morning black, and the thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that she struggled to suppress. "Gentlemen," she said, gesturing toward the wicker chairs, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Hartwell's smile was cold as winter seas. "Isabella, my dear, we've come out of concern for your welfare. The arrangement you've made with this pirate is causing considerable unrest among our own workers." Captain Morrison leaned forward, his merchant's instincts sharp as a blade. "They're hearing stories about fair wages and improved conditions. Some are asking why they can't have the same considerations. It's becoming problematic." "My workers are productive and content," Isabella replied carefully. "Surely that's what we all desire for our estates." "Content workers become demanding workers," interjected Colonel Pemberton, Dr. Pemberton's brother and owner of the largest plantation on the island's eastern shore. "Your pirate friend is filling their heads with dangerous ideas about their worth and rights. This could spread like wildfire through the entire colony." As if summoned by their words, Ronan appeared in the doorway. He'd been working in the mill and his shirt clung to his chest, damp with honest sweat. His hair was tied back with a leather cord, and there was a smudge of grease on his jaw that Isabella found oddly endearing. He took in the scene with a quick glance, his expression hardening as he recognized the threat these men represented. "Gentlemen," he said with mock courtesy, "I hope you're not troubling Mrs. Duval with complaints about my work. The plantation's showing a profit for the first time in 2 years." Hartwell's face flushed red. "How dare you address your betters without permission, you criminal scum?" "Isabella, this is exactly what we're talking about. The man has no respect for proper hierarchy. The man has a name," Ronan said quietly, but Isabella could see the dangerous glitter in his green eyes. "And he's done nothing but improve this estate's fortunes. Perhaps if you gentlemen spent less time in your counting houses and more time learning what actually motivates workers, Your own plantations might prosper as well. Colonel Pemberton rose from his chair, hand moving instinctively toward his sword hilt. By God, I'll not be lectured by a sea rover who should have been hanged weeks ago. Isabella, if you don't control this animal, we will. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, despite the tropical heat. Ronan stepped fully into the room, and Isabella noticed how he positioned himself. Balanced, ready, but not yet threatening. Years of survival had taught him to read violence before it erupted. Colonel, Isabella said quickly, rising to place herself between the two men, Mr. Hale is under my protection and employment. Any threat against him is a threat against me and my property. Morrison's laugh was ugly. Your property? Isabella, you're a woman alone trying to manage an estate and a dangerous criminal. Clearly, you're overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control. Perhaps it's time to consider selling to someone more capable. At a fraction of its worth, no doubt, Ronan observed. How convenient that Mrs. Duval's success threatens your labor model just when you're ready to make generous offers for her land. Hartwell's mask of civility finally slipped completely. You want to know the truth, you Irish bastard? Governor Thornfield is hosting a reception next week for Lord Admiral Blackwood, who's arrived from London to assess colonial security. We're going to inform him that you're planning a slave uprising using your pirate connections. One word from the Admiral and you'll be back in chains. And if Mrs. Duval protests, Morrison added silkily, we'll simply point out that a grieving widow clearly isn't capable of managing a dangerous criminal. The courts will have no choice but to place the estate under more stable management. Isabella felt the world tilting beneath her feet. These men weren't just threatening Ronan. They were planning to destroy everything she'd worked to rebuild. The plantation, her independence, her very identity as a free woman, would all disappear into their grasping hands. You underestimate me, gentlemen, she said with a calmness that surprised even herself. And you underestimate him. Ronan moved closer and she caught the scent of salt air and honest sweat that seemed to cling to him always. Isabella, he said quietly, using her first name in front of the others without apology. These men have already made their decision. Nothing we say here will change their plans. Then what do you suggest we do, she asked, turning to face him fully. In that moment she realized she trusted his judgment more than her own. Somewhere in the past weeks he'd become more than just an employee. He'd become her partner in ways that went far beyond business. His smile was sharp as a cutlass. We attend their reception. We show the Admiral exactly what kind of men are trying to undermine colonial prosperity out of jealousy and greed. And we prove that a partnership built on mutual respect is stronger than their corruption. Colonel Pemberton sputtered with outrage. You can't seriously think to bring this criminal into polite society. I can and I will, Isabella said firmly. As my estate manager and escort, Governor Thornfield has already acknowledged the legality of our arrangement. The Admiral will hear our side of the story. Hartwell's face was nearly purple with rage. Isabella, you're making a grave mistake. This man will be your ruin. Perhaps, she replied, stepping closer to Ronan until their shoulders almost touched. But he'll be my choice of ruin. Gentlemen, I believe our business is concluded. After the men had departed in a thunder of hoofbeats and muttered threats, Isabella and Ronan stood alone in the drawing room. The storm clouds outside had grown darker, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the plantation. You realize what you've just done? Ronan asked quietly. You've declared war on the most powerful men in the colony. For me. Isabella turned to face him, seeing her own reflection in his green eyes. I've chosen to fight for what's mine, for what we've built together. And if we lose? She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his sun-warmed skin. Then we'll lose together. But Ronan, I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting other people decide my fate. For the first time since Henri died, I feel alive again. I feel like myself again. His hand rose slowly to cup her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Isabella, you need to understand. I'm not a gentleman. I can't offer you the kind of life these people think you deserve. What if I don't want that kind of life anymore? She whispered. What if I want something real, something earned rather than inherited? The thunder crashed overhead as their lips met, and in that kiss, Isabella tasted salt and freedom and the promise of storms weathered together. Outside, the rain began to fall in torrents, but inside the manor, two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate worlds discovered that love could indeed bloom even in the most unlikely soil. The battle for their future would begin at Governor Thornfield's reception, but tonight they had each other, And sometimes in a world built on the shifting sands of fortune and fate, that was enough to build a dream upon.